Out of all the big games that are supported by kernel-level anti-cheats, it seems like League is by far the most transparent with its data. Usually, the companies try to stay as quiet as possible so that most players have no idea what's happening in the background. Because kernel-level anti-cheat is a bit of a swear word in the gaming community. But the truth is, these anti-cheats are everywhere and they are part of pretty much every big game. And so, when Riot first announced that Vanguard would be joining League of Legends, the community didn't take it lightly at first. And everyone started saying how they would quit the game immediately if Riot forced them to install another anti-cheat on their computer. With most of the concern coming from A, the anti-cheat running in the background all the time, even if it is not really doing anything, and B, in theory, these anti-cheats can be used for malicious things. Although, to this day, that still remains to be a theory. But the funniest thing about this is that ever since the announcement of Vanguard joining League, Riot shared some data on how things are going. With the best statistic being that while the bots are now gone from the game, the overall player engagement is unchanged. Which means that either all the people who said would quit didn't quit, or new players joined the game as the old ones quit. And in both cases, it is a big W for Riot. But the data did not stop here, and last week we got a massive post where Riot goes really deep into how things are going with Vanguard. And I don't want to be a clickbaiting YouTuber. I'm pretty sure I never asked anyone to subscribe or anything, but those numbers will shock you. So without further ado, let's dive into the post called Vanguard and League Retrospective. The post begins by continuing on what Riot promised to do. Be transparent as much as possible and let people know what is happening with Vanguard. Because these anti-cheats require a lot of trust from the community. And again, at the beginning they summarize the biggest challenges League is facing when it comes to dealing with cheaters. It is a free-to-play game, and so cheaters have an easy access to new accounts. Not only that, besides cheating, it is also a simple environment for toxicity, boosting and feeding. And so, kernel-level anti-cheat was the only real option to deal with this situation. However, they immediately foreshadow something that's coming later in the post. They mention that they don't want to wait for PC to come up with better solutions. And until that happens, they believe that their anti-cheat is a much better solution. Which hints that one day Windows might come up with an update that might make all kernel-level anti-cheats obsolete. But more on that towards the end of the post. First, let's jump into the most important thing. All the goals they managed to achieve after updating League's anti-cheat. With some of these wins coming pretty much immediately after Vanguard's deployment. With the first one being removing scripting. And here we get an awesome graph that shows us what exactly happened over the last 8 months. First of all, notice the percentage. This shows us how many competitive games had a cheater in them. So you can see that before Vanguard, about 5% of ranked games had a scripter in them, with the height of the colored parts showing us how many scripters were banned in that day. So the two most important colors here are the yellow side and the purple side. The yellow side is marked as Pac-Man, which was Riot's original anti-cheat that was running for about 15 years now, with the purple side being Vanguard. The first thing you might notice is that Pac-Man had a lot more ban waves. These are all the spikes that you can see. But if you look at Vanguard's side, you can see that they are simply banning more people every day. The curious thing about this is that the results here are honestly wild. According to these numbers, which even the post directly confirms, scripting fell all the way down to 1% of all ranked games, which happened for the first time in nearly 4 years. So now there is only one scripter in about every 200 ranked games. And what's crazy is that this means that they banned over 175,000 accounts since Vanguard released. And that is still only scripting. There is more to come. Now the curious thing here is that after Vanguard was deployed, the bans didn't really increase that much. I mean, it all went up in thousands. But was this really the reason scripting went all the way down to 1%? Well, here's the thing. Vanguard doesn't just ban people, it also prevents people from getting into the game if they don't have Vanguard up. Which means a lot of scripters don't even have a chance to get into the game. Now, the most recent ban wave that got out was on July the 8th. This was because Riot was about to go on their summer break. And in that time, in the matter of 2 days, they banned about 35,000 scripters. And that is all while most scripters were already annihilated. So these stats are amazing. But besides scripters, Vanguard is also targeting bots. And so next we get a graph that shows us all the botting hours. And this looks glorious. This simply shows you the raw number of botting hours. Or in other words, it shows you how much the bots manage to plague the games. And I love the reason mentioned here for why they are using hours for this graph. You would be correct to assume that I used hours here so that executives could more immediately feel the impact in the deepest vault of their wallet. Server costs. That's right, don't forget that for Riot, getting rid of bots is an investment. They are actually saving money by removing bots. Now, in the past, it was mentioned that server costs were one of the biggest money sinks for Riot. But this may still leave you to wonder, is it really worth for Riot to invest in Vanguard this heavily? Well, remember that botters and cheaters always swarm around the biggest games. Because that's where the botting market is gonna be the biggest. And since League is still one of the most played games in the world, the numbers have to be crazy there. And in fact, we get a piece of that revealed too. And brace yourselves, because the costs are nuts. First, what's cool to see is that in this post, Riot also shows us how they managed to catch a lot of bots. The reason why this is cool is because developers never do this. They never want to reveal how they catch cheaters for obvious reasons. But one way Riot did this was by looking at the quality of the game. Specifically, they showed us this script. Now, if you don't understand Terminator language, let me explain. This line looks at the resolution of your game, and it marks it as suspicious if you are playing at the resolution of 1000 by 1000 pixels. But on top of that, it also checks if you are playing at less than 15 FPS. Now, why would Riot do this? Well, it's simple. Have you ever seen a bot farm? You have a guy somewhere in a basement with a single computer that is launching 8 versions of the same game. Which means, of course, the FPS is limited to 9 per instance. Otherwise, the computer would melt. Not to mention, all of these also usually run on virtual machines. Now, of course, if Riot only looked at the FPS, they would be also banning a lot of people who play on potatoes. Which is why they also looked at the resolution. It is safe to assume that nobody would play League with that resolution. That is, unless it was controlled by a bot. So by combining these two factors together, you're able to catch a lot of them. And in fact, focusing down the virtual machine sessions, the bots dropped down from 1 million hours a day to only 5,000. This is a crazy success. And the funny thing is that apparently you were able to see a lot of these banned bots if you played co-op versus AI. Because in order to cheat, you have to launch the game without Vanguard, which apparently a lot of these bots manage to do by bypassing the system. But if you launch League without the Vanguard, you can't connect to a session. So, obviously, you instantly disconnect. So if you have recently played a game of co-op versus AI and your teammates were just standing there in the base, the chances are they were bots. And that's simply because Vanguard kinda acts as a bridge to Riot's server. Now, of course, the reason why bots are popular in League in the first place is because people use them to level up accounts which they then sell for real money. And these accounts would then become burner accounts for boosting and smurfing. And what's crazy is that with the help of Vanguard, Riot was able to ban 3.5 million accounts that were just sitting there waiting to be sold. If we assume that all of these accounts would get sold eventually, which I would assume about 40% of them would be caught by the old anti-cheat too. But with an average of $10 per account on the black market, Riot banned $35 million of value on the botting market. And that is wild. That is why a lot of people are trying bots. But of course, another strength of Vanguard is speed. In fact, it is perhaps the best feature. It can ban people immediately and in the middle of a game if it detects a cheat. And for that, we got a graph called Time to Action. On the blue side, it shows how many games a cheater could go through before they got detected. And on the yellow side, it shows you how many days a new cheating account was up before it got detected. Or in other words, it shows us how long a new cheat is able to hide in the ecosystem. So at first, it took individual cheaters about 45 games to get caught, and now with Vanguard it is only about 10. And when it comes to new cheats, it took them about 20 days to find them, but now we are in single-digit days, with the new cheats only being up for a day or two before they get caught for ruining people's games. And after that, the post dives into some fun statistics with specific champions. For example, here are the top 9 champions who are used for scripting. And yes, it is hilarious to see Zeri's stats, because the left side shows us how much the win rate increased compared to normal players playing the champion, and it is funny to see that all of these are AD carries. So from the normal bunch, the cheaters gave Kog'Maw the highest win rate increase, because he got about 10 extra % of win rate in cheaters' hands, which to be honest, even that is not that much, especially if you need to dedicate cheats to winning. But funnily enough, because normally people are not that great on Zeri, because Zeri is a complex champion, the cheats were able to give her extra 20% win rate. But what's cool is that you can also see how everyone's win rate went down towards the end, which actually means that over time the cheats are not as effective. Because in order for the cheats to work really well, they would have to get exposed to Vanguard. And since they can't do that, the cheats are simply not that good. And then on the right you can see the classic win rate of all the champions in Diamond and above. Here you can see that pretty much every AD carry besides Ezreal had a slightly higher win rate because of bots. Though in total we are still talking about a 0.2% increase. So after Vanguard was deployed, that's why it all went down a bit. And lastly, in the great lineup of great graphs, we have one more. It is one focusing on false positives. Because even the greatest machines and their algorithms can make mistakes. Though apparently, in the case of Vanguard, it is extremely rare. And over the year, it got even better. So here, if we look at the vertical pillars, it shows how many of the Vanguard bans were reverted because they affected innocent people, with each day showing us 3 pillars for 3 different reasons. The biggest one is the blue one, because that one shows the accounts that were reverted after they got stolen by a cheater. You can see that about 1% of all the Vanguard bans are reverted for that reason. Now next to it you have the tiny yellow part, which is only about 0.01%. And these are the bans for borrowing your account to your friend, which is still against Riot's TOS, so these are all exceptions. Or they are bans for buying a second-hand computer part that was already marked as a cheater on someone else's machine. Here you can see that both of these cases are extremely rare. And next to that you have the red bar, which is only about 0.02%, and that is what most of the excuses are targeting. It is people having some kind of software on their computer which would normally be seen as a cheating software, but in their case it had a legitimate use. And the post confirms Riot considers that to be the real false positive. Because in the other 2 cases, Vanguard was working properly. It's just that people crossed paths with the cheater IRL. So the real case of Vanguard making a legitimate mistake is less than 1%. In fact, we are dealing with 0.02%. with one mistake happening in every 10,000 bans. And so now, if you look at the horizontal lines, you can see for how long all of these mistakenly banned accounts stayed banned. You can see that at the beginning it took Riot about 15 days to give people back their accounts after being stolen, and now they are down to only about 5 days. And for the real mistakes that Vanguard makes, you can see that you can get your account back in less than a day. Here, the post also mentions that the cheaters realize that the only way for them to get their accounts back is to pretend that they gave their account to a friend. So suddenly, League players are somehow getting friends, I see. But as a reminder, borrowing your account to someone else is still against Riot's TOS. So, I love this quote we got here. It's worth mentioning that my brother's pet iguana installed scripts on my computer is not currently accepted as a valid excuse for cheating. But based on the frequency we receive it, we're beginning to have concerns that the Godzilla franchise could be prophetic. But after that, unfortunately, we don't get any more cool graphs, but we do get some cool info. So let's blitz through all of those. For example, kernel-level anti-cheats often require internet connection for them to work properly. But Vanguard actually doesn't. The thing is, with software accessing Windows kernel, it is often a race of who launches first. If the cheats boot up before even Vanguard, well, that's another obstacle to deal with. And so oftentimes the booting priority is dealt with using drivers. Because drivers have to launch first to quote-unquote drive the hardware to do the proper thing. And so that's why Vanguard blocks old drivers, vulnerable drivers, and even drivers that are commonly used by cheaters. Next, funnily enough, Riot mentions the CrowdStrike incident. You know, the one that took down the networking of about half of the world. And they confirm that Vanguard is largely not at risk. It will not break your computer. After that, we also get a lot of technical details that go beyond my understanding too. But interestingly enough, there is one thing to pick out here. Windows can actually update their base malware protection to help all kernel-level anti-cheats, which means they would need less data from your computer, which would also make the entire public happier. Again, it is all connected to who boots first. But remember, all of this is still happening on the infrastructure of Windows. So in theory, Microsoft is able to make all of this obsolete. But until that happens, kernel-level anti-cheats have to be there to fill the gaps. And then we also get some info on a bad practice that a lot of people do. You see, since a lot of people leave their computers on all the time, it means that Vanguard is simply still running from the very first boot. And this can start a problem if your computer goes into sleep during a leak session. And this is especially a problem if you then log into your account on a second machine with a new Vanguard session, and so now you are just kicking one instance out with another. And if you are in the middle of a game, and that sometimes happens, using this second launched instance, well, that one is not properly verified. So what happens is that you just get disconnected and you lose your LP. So in short, don't do that. And Riot is aware that this is totally a problem on their side and they are trying to fix it. Because leaving your computer on the entire time is nothing really evil. Maybe besides the possible fire hazard. And finally, the post then dives into some of the bigger problems people have faced. First of all, there are some third-party applications such as game overlays, which Vanguard blocked, which didn't make them work properly, and your computer's performance might have gone down as a result. This is because, even after getting blocked, a lot of apps just keep trying to launch themselves until they work. And if it happens all the time, it may make it seem like Vanguard is eating your FPS, even though it is the blocked app. Then some people face some problems with enabling TPM2 in their BIOS, because BIOS can be complicated, and not everyone is a tech expert. And yes, there were also some cases where Vanguard could cause a blue screen. But apparently that wasn't really a Vanguard's fault. It is just a specific interaction a lot of other softwares have with the 13th and the 14th generation of Intel's processors. And just to remind you, even that didn't break anyone's computer. And this leads us to the last part. Here we get a confirmation that regardless of what happens, Riot is not throwing in the towel with Vanguard. In fact, things seem to be going extremely well, and the cheaters are very slowly admitting their defeat. Then Riot confirms that eventually, after Windows gets their update, they would like to make a version of Vanguard that is on demand, which means it would only be up while the game is running. It is possible, but everyone is waiting for Microsoft right now. Another thing mentioned here is the tackling boosters. This is a bit sketchy because boosting is not your traditional cheating. Because while you may be able to catch the account that is cheating, you can't catch the person who is next to the cheater just leeching off of it. But after Riot deployed their changes to Smurf detection, there is a chance they can be a bit quicker at finding out which people are specifically teaming up with other cheaters. And lastly, yes, Vanguard is coming to Mac too. This is simply because the cheaters realized they can't cheat on PC. And so everyone is slowly moving to Mac. And there they are being plagued. Now the funny thing is that Mac actually has a slightly better kernel protection, so Mac users won't have to install a whole new software. Riot can make it part of the base league. But yes, Vanguard on Mac should be up by the end of this year. And that is where the post ends. So what did we learn? Well, Vanguard is simply really effective. Of course, people will always question the power this anti-cheat holds, especially since it can technically access the data on your computer, but honestly, why would Riot do that? I would be more concerned that someone else can access your data using Vanguard, because that is probably more likely, but even that is extremely unlikely. Anyway, if you haven't noticed any bots in any of your recent games, it is definitely because Vanguard annihilated them all. Which is kinda sad, because I really liked Doom bots.